Welcome everybody. Hopefully this is the event that you're expecting. It's all around turning the dial on net zero. My name's Ilona Alcock. I'm founder and director of Elevate. I'm delighted to have my colleagues on the call this morning as well. We're a new business development consultancy. We've been around 7 coming into 8 months now, and one of the things that we were really passionate about as we built up that company was that we weren't just a good business commercially, but we were a business that did good as well. And there's probably a much better way of phrasing that. But it's meant that sustainability has been one of our key focuses right from the start. It's something that has been driven in lots of different ways. It's been things that have been personally important to us. We've seen that net zero and green agenda really kind of move up the list of what people are thinking about in pretty much every single sector that we deal with. And that's from a place of staff as customers, government regulations. For those of you like us who are based in Greater Manchester, we have this net zero target of 2038, so 12 years ahead of the rest of the UK. So it's got that really kind of intense focus around it. So as we started to work out what Elevate was going to look like, one of the things we did was to speak to Phil Corbell, who has founded the Carbon Literacy Project, and started to deliver that training. And then in February, we became the world's first carbon literate business development organisation. And as we were going through that process, started having conversations with Lorien, who were in their journey to becoming more sustainable, starting to have some very similar conversations to the ones that we'd been having with clients. And what's been an absolute joy in those conversations is it's not come from a place of, we want to kind of tell everybody we're doing the right thing, veering into that kind of greenwashing territory. But it's come from a real place of wanting to learn, wanting to see what more they can do, and to actually bring their clients along that journey as well. So absolutely delighted that they asked us to get involved in this event and to chair it this morning. So I'm shortly going to introduce Darren from Lorien, who will give you a little bit more of the background to this event. And then we'll be introducing our 4 panellists for today, all of whom are working within organisations that are making huge strides in this area, and there's a lot that we're going to be able to learn from them. And at the end, we'll open up to Q&A. I would really encourage you, though, that if you think of questions as we're going through, if somebody says something and you want to know a little bit more about it, do just bob it in the Q&A box as you think that we may cover it in the session, which is great. But if not, it means that you're not having to think back to that question at the end, and we will cover it then. So just bob those in as you think of them, and we'll keep an eye on them. So I'm just going to stop my screen share now and pass over to Darren just to explain a little bit about Lorien's role in this and why it's become increasingly important to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ilona. Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Darren Topping. I'm Director of Solutions and Insight for Lorien. So just to quickly introduce Lorien and what we do, we're a specialist recruitment solutions provider with a really proud 40-year heritage of leading technology. And we work with all sizes of customers to deliver MSP, RPO, total talent, project solution. And we're really proud to be represented by some of our clients on the panel today in Nationwide Building Society and KPMG. We're also really proud to be part of the Global Impelling Group, who go to market under 14 specialist brands, including Lorien, and some of the others that you may have heard of include SRG, Carbon 60, Tate, and Blue Arrow. And as Ilona mentioned, today's webinar was really created as ourselves at Lorien really progress on our own sustainability, green and net zero journey. We really are just starting out, and although we're making some really big strides already, we wanted to know what we can do on an individual level. What can we do to help the environment and lower carbon emissions, whether that's in the office or at home? What are those small steps that we can all take to take greater care of the environment? So whilst taking care of the environment is simply the right thing to do, there's also a business case for greater environmental care, including within HR and talent acquisition. So for example, over 70% of people choose to work for with a strong environmental agenda. We know that more than a third of people give more time and effort to a job if a company's got a top leading sustainability agenda. And we know that 5% of people would turn down a job offer at an organisation with a poor sustainability record. And actually, this is so powerful when talent pipelines are so tough at the moment. We know that company sustainability would make 73% of more likely to accept a job offer. So it isn't just the right thing to do. There is a great business case behind it all as well. So thank you for joining us today, and I'll pass back to you, Ilona, and the panel for today's discussion, which I'm really looking forward to.
Thanks ever so much, Darren. And yeah, absolutely singing our tune there, that one of the conversations we have so often is, I want to do the right thing, but, I can't afford to. And, obviously some of these things, they do cost money initially, but more and more we're seeing that we're actually in this situation that the business can't afford not to be sustainable and get involved in that green agenda. And it'll be great to hear from the panelists kind of those commercial drivers, as well as perhaps more of our principled value-driven stance as well. And I really do believe that, those profits and purpose go hand in hand. So I'm going to go to each of the panelists in turn, just to give a really brief introduction of the role that they have and the organisation that they're working in. And absolutely delighted that every single one of them is from, a phenomenal company and absolutely the right person to talk to us today. So really looking forward to learning from all of you. So if I could start with you, Bev.
Yeah, thanks, Ilona. Morning, guys. I'm Bev Taylor. I'm the Sustainability Director for Bruntwood. We're a family-owned property company headquartered in Manchester. And Ilona's just touched on something that's really important to us, the idea of being a sort of purpose-driven business. The key driver for all of us is around creating thriving cities. And obviously sustainability is a huge part of that. We were the first propco in the UK to create a net zero target, and ours is 2030. Seems a long way off, but I've got to tell you, if you're the person dealing with the numbers every day, it seems to get closer every time we run the figures. So I'm really excited to talk about some of that stuff today.
Wonderful. Thanks ever so much, Bev. And Elevate's been working closely with Bruntwood Works since we launched, and it is that real alignment of values that was so important to us. And yeah, we're going to come on to kind of targets and stuff in a moment, but I feel like as soon as we got through 2020, 2030 suddenly seemed much, much, much closer than it's ever been. And we'll hear a lot about this being this kind of defining decade that we have in front of us. Wonderful. If I could come to you next, Christos.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Christos. I'm the head of people and culture for Auto Trader. And Auto Trader is another FTSE 100 business that's headquartered in Manchester. And for us, our purpose is to drive change together responsibly. And as part of our purpose, sustainability and being responsible towards the environment is one of the key priorities that we have. So yes, thank you for inviting me. Good to be here today.
Oh, thanks ever so much for joining us, and I'm going to delve a little deeper into it soon, but Auto Trader's got such a fantastic story to tell, so really delighted that you can join us today. If I can come to you next, Sarah.
Sure. So I'm Sarah Benson, and I'm the Environment Manager for KPMG UK, so the UK member firm. So hopefully most of you will have heard of the brand, but we have kind of accountancy services, but then also our advisory services as well, including some that cover environment, ESG, climate and climate risk. And so for us, we'll go into it more, I'm sure, in the discussion, but a lot of the drivers around climate are walking the talk and learning ourselves, so that then we can help other people on that journey through our services as well. So my role is all about making KPMG, our internal operations and our people more sustainable to kind of reduce our bottom line of carbon.
Wonderful, thanks, Sarah. And I love that. Hopefully people are aware of KPMG. I think we can be pretty sure that most people will be, but always a pleasure when people just don't take that for granted. And I think as we go through this discussion, we'll find out a lot more about what you're up to that perhaps people don't necessarily associate with that brand straight away. So last but not least, James, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Good morning, everyone. I'm James Rowlands. I'm the lead policy and public affairs manager at Nationwide Building Society. My role is to lead all Nationwide's campaigning and external comms work around green homes in particular. Again, I work on the basis everyone knows who Nationwide are, and you've seen our branches on your high streets, but we are the country's biggest building society, second biggest mortgage lender, and a top 3 provider of savings accounts. As a building society, we're owned by our 16 million members, so that's the mortgage holders, the account holders, rather than being a shareholder-owned company, which we hope gives us a different perspective on things, driven by our core purpose of ensuring everyone has a good quality home they can call their own. And increasingly, a good quality home is not just making sure it's safe and secure, but also making sure that it's a green home and fit for the future. So we're really excited to see how we can work with both our members and others to deliver those green homes for the future in particular, and have a contribution to the wider debate around the environment.
Thanks so much, James. And yeah, I think it's really important that business model becomes part of the conversation, because I think we are seeing real differences in the way that companies are structured to the way that they're behaving around their people and in the environment. So it'll be great to dig a little deeper into that. So I'm going to come back to you in the same order, just to keep things nice and simple, and also because Bev had started answering this in her introduction, but around that kind of net zero target and sustainability policy. So I know that you said, Bev, 2030 kind of your target. What does that actually mean? Like, what is it that you need to have achieved by 2030? What does that look like for the business?
Yeah, so it's a really good point, actually. I think the whole net zero thing, trying to understand what that means for your business. So for us, it was about trying to look at our emissions in general. And as a property company, interestingly, only a small percentage of our emissions are from things that we do or things that are in our control. About 5% of our emissions are from our own use of fuel like gas or diesel or petrol and electricity. Around 95% of our emissions are from other activities that we're involved with, our supply chain and things our customers do. So understanding net zero for us is about obviously trying to reduce our own impacts, buying clean energy and so on. But then it's more significantly about trying to influence others, both up and down our sort of value chain. So I think for any company, it's really important that you understand where your emissions are, and then you can start trying to look at what your strategy is going to be to net off those emissions. And for any business, that might be around reducing, it might be about producing or procuring, but getting to that first step of understanding what you're trying to offset or trying to reduce is probably the most important for me.
Brilliant. Yeah, and there's so much to unpick in that, isn't there? That it's understanding how wide does that footprint go? Because I think it's very easy to be like, right, well, this is what I do, so I'm kind of okay with that. But understanding that role that you play as an organisation within a wider supply chain and wider in the community means that it's much more difficult just to understand what that footprint is, and then to start to kind of take action where you don't have that direct influence. So really great to hear that's how broad you're setting everything. And then one of the things which I'm sure we'll touch on a little bit later is I did kind of reducing and offsetting, and I think there's been a lot recently around kind of this idea of greenwashing, and it being well, if we just offset everything, we can say that we're net zero. And whilst offsetting kind of plays its part, it should be the bits that we can't reduce.
Absolutely.
Not just a tick box. And we had a brilliant presentation not so long ago from Rob Valentine, one of your colleagues, and he showed just within one building the level of things that go into it, assessing that data and what you can reduce, and then that kind of little bit that's left. And it was just a really great insight into how difficult that process is, which then does ring alarm bells when you see companies who kind of manage to do this overnight, that you think perhaps something else might be going on there. So really great to highlight those things as part of your journey. So if I come to you next, Christos, what are the kind of big targets that Auto Trader is working towards?
So we've spent a lot of time actually in the past few months establishing our environmental commitments that we're going to have between now and 2030. Ours start with what we do as a business, how we run our business, and then the education that we have about our people to be more environmentally aware. And as part of that is becoming carbon neutral this year, and then setting our net zero targets by the end of this year, which hopefully is going to be by 2030. But like Bev said, it's extending beyond our own operations. Auto Trader is a digital business that doesn't actually manufacture anything. Our carbon emissions are not actually as high, but is looking at our supply chain that is going to be a big focus for us. So we committed to the Science-Based Targets initiative, and we are going to be making sure that all the promises that we make are, first of all, both aspirational but achievable, and we try to do it the right way, like you both mentioned, not necessarily just using offsetting as a quick way to do it. Although offsetting has in the journey to net zero, I think offsetting has a part to play as long as it's done using credible projects that you can support. And then beyond our own operations, we are part of the wider automotive industry, an industry that's obviously responsible for a lot of carbon emissions. So we want to play our part in both educating our customers, and that's the automotive retail sector, on how we can support them in their net zero journey, how they run their operations, but also when it comes to how do they engage with consumers around alternative fuel vehicles, mainly electric vehicles. Then for consumers to make sure that they have the information that they can make more sustainable choices. There's loads of confusion around electric vehicles with the consumers, and we have a part to play in that, because we've got the audience of consumers that we can support. And then the wider industry and our local communities, how do we use our voice in order to promote all the sustainability agendas? So we're looking at it in all these different ways.
Wonderful. And I love that aspirational but achievable. And I think that's got to be at the core, hasn't it? That there's no point, trying to be perfect, because that's just not going to happen, and we'll fall so far short. But it's also not letting ourselves get away with something that's just a bit of a sticking plaster. So that's a great a really snappy way of explaining, I think, what targets need to be. And what's really interesting for me is hearing yourself and Bev speak from totally different industries in terms of what your supply chains look like and your kind of core processes, that actually the approach is very, very similar in get our own house in order, what do we need to do, and then actually where have we got a level of influence. I'm also going to drop in an absolute shameless plug at this point, just because of what you mentioned around electric vehicles. We're actually working with Electricity Northwest on an electric vehicles explained event on the 13th of May, and I think it's brilliant to see private companies helping to move that discussion forward, because it is a really complicated topic, and so to see you taking on that responsibility, which that's not your core business, but it is definitely where you have a lot of influence in changing consumer behaviour, so that's really brilliant to see. So Sarah, if I could come to you next in terms of KPMG's targets. I know you're in the process of rewriting a little bit of stuff at the moment, but kind of where are your kind of key targets that you're working towards?
So similar to Bev and Christos, actually, we've set ourselves a science-based target, which we announced last year, and is approved by Science-Based Target Initiative. So that's, for us, our target is set for 2030. And it's zero direct emissions, so those that we can control, bringing them down to zero. And then it's also got a net zero element to it as well, that will try and be net zero by 2030. So really similar story, actually, that whilst we have operations that we need to control, which is predominantly our company cars, the offices that we operate out of in terms of our electricity supply, a huge proportion of our emissions fall into that kind of scope 3 indirect category. Over 80% are our supply chain, but also we have a business travel element to that, as well as our colleagues travel to client sites. So a huge part of our work is our supplier engagement, and we've also set ourselves a target of reducing those emissions in our supply chain by 25% by 2030. So that acknowledgement that we need to play a part in reducing those and influencing and talking to our suppliers about how they need to come with us on this journey. But then with a view to the net zero, we're looking at what offsetting what kind of part that would play in that net zero. And to Christos's point around the quality of those offsets and making sure that they're right for what we're doing, because net zero is a big challenge for us, and I think it's fair to say that we're not sure exactly how we're going to get there in terms of what that will look like when we get to 2030, but we're certainly trying to find our way and do the right thing. And then I guess our science-based target and net zero is also supported by programs that we have around our supplier engagement and collaboration with our suppliers. We have a zero waste target as well by 2030, so trying to take that waste out of our business, a responsible travel strategy, which speaks to those kind of indirect emissions, and our employee engagement piece as well, so bringing our employees on the journey. And even if they can't, some of the bits in our net zero they can't influence, bringing them on with the things they can help us to do and the things that they can do in their own lives as well, to kind of support the wider sustainability journey.
Fantastic. And it is very much, we joked about it earlier, that brand that KPMG's got, but it does mean that you have that kind of level of influence within your supply chain to kind of bring those people with you, that, if you want to work with KPMG, this is what we need to see from you, and then the support to help them do that. But also, your role as an employer, that, we've all kind of mentioned people as being part of the story already, and we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. But yeah, being able to change those personal behaviours is really important as well. And what I really like there is not shying away from something just because we don't know quite what it's going to look like. And we hear about, this innovation gap of, well, if we're doing all of this stuff, we're still going to fall a bit short, but we've got a long time to work that out. And actually, if there's anything that we're good at, particularly within Greater Manchester, it's innovation. Those things are there. We've got some incredible people, some incredible companies that we can kind of put our faith that, by the time we get closer to 2030, the world will look different and there'll be kind of different solutions available. And it shouldn't be a reason not to get started now just because we don't know what the world's going to be in 10 years' time. And certainly looking back over the last 12 months, we shouldn't really be surprised by anything anymore. So it's just good to get cracking on this stuff. So finally, if I could come to you, James, what has Nationwide got lined up in terms of targets for the business?
So we are, again, like everyone, I think, sort of working on science-based targets and a net zero commitment. We're sort of working out exactly what we can commit to and what that looks like, but very much working towards that and understanding what the business needs to do. We've sort of done some of the easier actions. So our own business is net zero, so it has been since April last year. So in terms of our emissions, we source all our energy from renewable sources, and we do have a small amount of offsetting that helps us achieve that target at the moment, which is again something we would look at. And I think, like the others, our challenge is the scope 3 emissions, the emissions which are linked to us but slightly outside our control. And in particular with Nationwide, obviously our biggest thing is our mortgage lending. So there's all the homes on our book need to move towards reducing their carbon to help us meet our overall target. And our sort of interim challenge there is we want to get half the homes on our mortgage book to EPCC standard by 2030 as a sort of an interim measure, and that's quite a challenge. We can do things directly, like we offer very low rates of interest if you want an advance on your mortgage to make some of those green home improvements. We're looking at other ways we can incentivize people to buy a green home, whether that's other mortgage support we can offer. We're even looking at, is there the possibility of Nationwide being the organisation you go to get your end-to-end retrofit service? So you just come into one of our branches or speak to someone online and say, I'd like insulation or an air source heat pump, and could we be the business that facilitates that journey for a customer there? But even if we can sort of persuade everyone to take out their further advance and use that service, it probably still wouldn't be enough. So a big part of my role is working with the government to say you need to be putting in place ambitious targets around new house building. We were very disappointed that the Green Homes grant that the government offered was scrapped the other week, because essentially the government needs to be offering people money to help them make these changes when they're motivated to do so. So really understanding that sort of how you get consumers, businesses, governments aligned to tackle all the carbon emissions and drive everything down towards net zero is the challenge we're looking at, and our targets are going to be based around that.
Incredible. And yeah, really interesting what you say there with the Green Homes grants. It was a very short-lived programme, I think is fair to say. And it's going to bring me on to my next point. So I'm going to stay with you, James, on this, because what we've found is that those kind of drivers for the green agenda are coming from multiple places. But it would seem to me that if some of that drive is from your customer base, they are also the voters. So you would think if there's an appetite coming to you for green homes and support, that is probably something that people kind of call on the government for. So I'm not going to ask you to get super political on it, don't worry. But it'd be really interesting to hear kind of from Nationwide's perspective, what are those drivers? Is it the customer base? Is it employees? Is it reputation? Is it a kind of a mix of different things?
So it's probably a mix of different things. So over the last few years, we've definitely seen more customers come to us and say that they're asking questions like, how can you help me improve, make green home improvements? Yeah, how can you help me finance those? And even questions like to Nationwide as a business, if I open a current account with you or a savings account with you, how can I be sure that my money isn't being invested in oil companies or coal mines? And more and more we're being asked that question. There's just that general growth in the public awareness around green issues. I think over the last couple of years, we've seen, you see Greta Thunberg, you've seen the focus on COP26 more recently. So that's driven public interest, and again, driven that desire for people to take action. And obviously as a business, we want to respond to that, particularly as a business focused around providing services to our members. We want to be sure that they can come to us and they don't sort of look at one of our competitors and go, oh, they're a bit greener, or I could potentially move a bit quicker on my green journey if I bank with someone else. And I think the government is starting to see that, but I think there's at the moment there's a disconnect almost between what people want and what we can deliver. So it's shifting that consumer interest into actual action, whether that's from homeowners themselves, from an organisation like Nationwide or the government. Everyone's trying to work out that issue, which is how you turn the interest into action. And I think it's cracking that idea, and how you shift people's interest into them actually making green home improvements, or buying an electric car, or doing some of those steps is the challenge we all face at the moment. And lots of people are working on it, and hopefully we're not far away from a solution to that.
Absolutely, it's that mindset shift, and then the support for people to be able to do it, and hopefully those two things are going to be coming a little bit closer together. So yeah, really interesting to see that kind of driver coming through, and really seeing the green agenda as a competitive edge that it perhaps hasn't done in previous years. So if I could come to you next, Sarah, you've touched partly on kind of KPMG of some of those drivers, but where are those kind of things coming from? Why is it something that's so important to the business?
I mean, luckily we have quite a lot of engagement on environment within our workforce anyway. So I work with lots of teams that embed environment into their roles without me asking and without me knocking on their door. But I think when we talk to senior stakeholders and we do those ambitious target setting, that's really when they want to know, what's our driver for this. And I guess the science-based target was a prime example of that, getting it through our board. And our biggest drivers and our biggest kind of levers to get them to sign up to it were our customer base. So every piece of work that we want to do, we bid on to our clients, and they ask us a range of questions in the format of a questionnaire or an RFP. And absolutely all of those without fail will mention environment in some capacity. It used to be, do you have kind of compliance systems? Are you compliant with legislation? It is now, what are you doing beyond that? How are you aligning with climate science? How are you driving climate through your business? How do you understand climate risk? So those questions are becoming more and more complex from our own customer base. What surprises me even when I talk about it is that the average age of a KPMG employee is actually mid-20s. It's something like 24, 25. So we have a hugely engaged workforce who want to work for an organisation that are doing the right thing, and they are extremely vocal in their opinions as well, which is great because it gives us that opportunity to push forward and say, this is what our colleagues want. This helps them to feel proud of working for KPMG. It's going to help them want to stay with us. It's going to help them to promote our brand outside of the normal conversations that we all have. So I think those two drivers are really our biggest kind of customer base, and then also our colleagues.
Brilliant. So just staying on that colleague piece with you, because yeah, when you said to me average age was 25, like I was genuinely shocked. I had no idea it was so low. And obviously, you know, we do have this perception which does seem to be borne out in what we're seeing, that kind of, you know, the younger generation are asking more of these questions, and kind of they want the employers that they work with to be doing the right thing and be seen to be doing the right thing. And the other thing that we kind of picked up on, and that I thought was really interesting when we chatted before this, was how KPMG's roles changed kind of over the last 12 months or so into helping to bring people in their personal capacity along that journey. So could you just tell us a little bit about how that role's changed KPMG in the last year or so?
Yeah, so I guess it also echoes a little bit of what James was saying for nationwide, and the kind of the way that people want to start interacting with businesses. But for KPMG, since COVID and everything has gone online, it's given us the opportunity to start talking to our employees in a new way about environment. So it used to be, here's our strategy, here's how you can help, you're in our offices, these are the things that you can do, you know, your impact is our impact. But now we've been able to go beyond that and start talking to our employees about what they can do in the home, because there's a strange stat, I think I heard it on another conference, that something like there was 4,000 more searches on Google over the COVID lockdown to do with sustainability, because people want to start being more sustainable as their life has changed.
I think we've seen, haven't we, that, you know, people, you know, really want to help each other with this, that this isn't a sense of, you know, well, I'm going to go away and do this. It's well, I'm going to do this, and I want to bring other people with me on that journey. And, you know, we've seen, you know, that the fact that the four of you are giving up your time this morning to be on a webinar like this really kind of shows that commitment to sharing what you're doing and helping bring everybody with you. So I'm just going to come to you now, James. We've spoken quite a bit about bringing people in at the start of their careers and that kind of younger end of the spectrum employees that we expect to kind of care about these things more. But one of the things that we chatted about previously was around kind of what impact does that have on someone in that kind of, you know, PR public affairs, as to how sustainable their companies are, and at a senior level, what kind of conversations are people having around it?
I think what's interesting from a sort of public affairs PR point of view is that there are always organisations you might work for who have a bit of stigma attached to them. So, you know, the tobacco industry springs immediately to mind. The defence industry also tends to have a bit. You know, you sort of get a bit tarred with the brush of working for one of the sort of more negatively viewed industries. I mean, I used to work for an estate agency body, and there was still a little bit around that. There's sort of, oh, you work for the estate agents, or that's you know, that's not great. And I think increasingly the companies that aren't sustainable as well now, or are seen as particularly environmentally unfriendly, are starting to, at least in my world, have a bit of that attitude towards them. And again, particularly speak to some of my younger colleagues who are sort of starting out in the world of work. They sort of say, oh, you know, I wouldn't work for an oil company, which, you know, maybe, yeah, a few years ago they'd have been quite happy to. And there is definitely that shift towards companies that aren't environmentally friendly, companies that aren't sustainable, are less attractive to work for. And certainly, you know, we've been interviewing recently, and lots of people applying for that role have said, you know, I want to work for an ethical company like Nationwide, one that has a good core purpose, one that we've seen is sort of on the right side of some of these discussions around, you know, whether it's housing or the green agenda. So it's definitely widens your pool of people you can access as an employer. You know, you're more attractive to, I think, people across the roles, across the levels of seniority. Our directors are as committed to this agenda, and certainly again when we have new senior people coming in, they like the purpose-driven nature of the business. I think particularly you contrast, so lots of them come to us from banks obviously, and they sort of say nationwide it's a much more committed place to work. It's a nicer place to work, and when we talk about things like the environment, you can feel they sort of say their view is that we're talking about it genuinely and do want to do things properly and make a change rather than it being greenwashing, because we have that more ethical standpoint and are differently motivated.
Fantastic. And I think that brings us back nicely actually to Darren's comments right at the start around those trends that they're seeing across recruitment, that where it is difficult to recruit in particular sectors and particular skill sets, that this sets you apart. You get that broader pool of candidates, but really interesting that that's going all the way through to director level, and that it's not just environment, it's that ethical purpose piece, that it's if I want to work somewhere and we work hard, we put a lot of hours in, we're going to spend a lot of our lives in these places, that there's that feeling of actually wanting to be a nice place to work with people who care about the community, who care around the environment. And maybe a few years ago that was seen as a little wishy-washy, is now definitely translating into we can get you the best candidates if this is the type of business that you are. Wonderful. So we've had a couple of questions pop up. So I'm just going to open that now and have a little look through those. So one is saying, with the popularity of Seaspiracy, I'm not sure if all the panelists have seen it. I watched it and was very pleased that I no longer eat fish from the start of it. And the focus on pollution with the ocean, how this is destroying the ability for our seas to absorb carbon dioxide. Are any of the panel looking at credible projects that focus on oceans rather than planting trees for offsetting? So a really interesting point there generally, and it might just be worth, I know a couple of you mentioned that offsetting still plays part of that journey, and absolutely should. What kinds of projects are they that you're working on? I don't know if anyone wants to kind of give me a wave if they know about any kind of particular offsetting project that they're working in that they wanted to share.
I can talk about our sort of offsetting strategy a little bit. I know the chat mentioned planting trees, but it doesn't need to be just about planting trees. Certainly locally, we've got lots of peat bogs, which are part of our own offsetting strategy. But it can be around things like putting solar on rooftops. We do a couple with a schools project. It can be all sorts of things. But interestingly, talking to the oceans point, I mentioned at the start about our engagement with our supply chain. Lots of our supply chain, particularly the carpet manufacturers, are doing lots of ocean-based stuff. And if you take a look at somebody like Interface's website, they've got a fantastic set of projects going on, which are around asking fishermen to collect the nylon fishing line. Then they can take that and almost bank it for a payment, so they're actually getting a reward for cleaning up the oceans, and then Interface take that material and turn it into carpet tile. And I think that's an example of the brilliant things that we can all do if we work together. But that's Interface are a terrific organisation in terms of sustainability. But if you're interested in that sea link, I'd have a look at their website.
Fantastic, really interesting. I think we do get that feeling sometimes like, oh, it's just planting trees, and planting trees is great, absolutely, let's go and plant trees. And I think so, Ethiopia with planting hundreds of millions of trees and reforesting huge areas, and that's brilliant and absolutely worthwhile, but it is not the only way of offsetting, and great to hear kind of projects like that. Sarah, were you just going to mention yours there?
Yeah, we're not at the situation at the moment where we are offsetting, but we're certainly looking to see what that strategy, build out a strategy for it when we get to that point. And I guess very similar actually to kind of what Bev was saying, we're looking at, so the government have set biodiversity targets for the UK, and we're having conversations with them at the moment as to how an offsetting piece for a UK based company could support them in their biodiversity. And that doesn't just mean tree planting, but it's trying to look at offsetting, not just as okay, we're going to offset emissions and it's whatever project it is, but actually trying to understand how we could have maximum benefit in the areas that we as an organisation operate in for the topics that are important for those areas. So it being more specific to what you want to achieve through that offsetting, rather than kind of looking at it from like a global approach. Ours is thinking about it in that UK, with that UK lens, with our operations, to try and link into those wider strategy pieces. So whilst it's not C specific to your question, I just wanted to reference that, really, that actually there are opportunities to kind of tie into other aims and other targets through offsetting, and that probably, I think, will develop in the next few years, even more so for the UK.
Brilliant. And I think that really echoes that level of engagement that we've been talking about, that, you know, if you've got people come to the office and working with a particular organisation, being able to see what's going on and those kind of co-benefits for the community has that massive kind of amplification of what you're doing. Yes, Christos.
Yeah, we're very much similar. So we've got a very small offsetting program that focuses on different projects around the world that we are supporting, but there's nothing specific about the oceans at the moment. And the only thing I want to add is that our sustainability network actually hosted a coffee chat on Seaspiracy, because a lot of our colleagues saw Seaspiracy, and what was a very interesting discussion, because a lot of them found information that sometimes contradicts what was on the documentary, and it encouraged a discussion. I think it's very important to make sure that whenever there is something like a documentary like that, it's, and anything that has to do with sustainability can be quite controversial, can be very different views on it. So I would say that make sure that you get your information from different sources, and I think it's very important to have that rounded view, as opposed to sort of like just getting it from one single source.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think, you know, Netflix has become our kind of replacement for where we get all of our knowledge from, you know, particularly being, you know, locked up in our houses for a year. And it's really easy that you watch something and you get totally swayed by it and brought in. And we do need to take that step back and be like, right, okay, actually, like, do a bit of digging and find out. And it's never as easy as just being like, right, I'll do that one thing and it won't have an impact on everything else, because there's so much that's interconnected. So really important. And, you know, equally, you know, everything that goes on social media as well, you know, you're going to get those, you know, really kind of polarized snippets. So this might be one that's a little bit more for you, James. So saying, I live in a social housing, and last year they installed air pressure heat pumps. It's green energy, but very expensive. During the pandemic, power supplies have been less supportive as can be in being responsive to financial issues. How can you achieve affordable sustainability? So we need that energy to be accessible and affordable. So really that kind of a point there in terms of balancing, having that all that green energy there, but needs to be kind of affordable and accessible.
Yes, I think this is one of the big challenges we all face around the green agenda, which is, how can you make sure it's affordable, as well as improving the environment, and particularly where you have new technology like air source heat pumps. They are, because they're new and they're not produced on a mass scale yet, they are a bit more expensive, and we can start to tackle that through government regulations. So within a couple of years, new build homes will have to be not connected to the mains gas, and they'll have to have some sort of alternative like an air source heat pump. So that sort of builds the supply chain, and you start to see efficiencies, and that will reduce the price overall. The energy companies, again, more immediately, are happy to work with people on these issues. They'll put people on green tariffs. They'll help with making sure that people can they will pay for some energy efficiency improvements depending on your situation. But ultimately, we think the government's going to have to step in and provide the financing for these improvements so people can afford them, and they need to almost subsidise them, at least while we get started on some of these processes. And again, a good aspect of the Green Homes Grant, which I mentioned earlier, was that lower income people could access more money from the government, and we need to be thinking about it on a dual path, that there are going to be some people who need additional support to make these changes, whereas others will be able to fund them themselves. And we need to make sure that where we do make energy efficiency improvements, particularly to people's homes, they're not just done in a way that this is the good thing to do at the moment, and we're doing this because it's energy efficient. We balance those different competing needs so that it is affordable and it is green as well. And if that means putting in not quite such good technology at this stage, is that something we need to think about? Do we need to think about things like subsidies and working through to balance all those different issues, which I'd say hasn't necessarily happened in the past, but we do need to start thinking a bit more about as this work ramps up.
Fantastic. And I think it comes back, doesn't it, to this. There's almost like sandwiching effects of people who want to do the right thing, what the government needs us to do, and there just needs to be something that joins up a little bit better to make that happen. So we have one final question, but luckily it is also our roundup question, so we've just got time to sneak it in. What would be your kind of top tip for somebody potentially working in that kind of HR, talent acquisition, supply chain manager type role? What is the one thing that you'd be like, once you finish watching this, next thing to go off and do? So if I could start with you, Bev.
It would be clear on your company's environmental policies so that you can articulate them to your potential new employees, and make sure you're aware of where you are on your journey, as a sort of a dual track thing.
Fantastic. So understand where you are and being able to articulate that to people coming in. Brilliant. Christos?
I would say collaborate with people across the business. I don't think this is only something that HR can solve, definitely not HR can solve, but look at your procurement, look at your office environment. So collaborate with loads of people across your business that are in certain roles and the ones that are really passionate about it.
Fantastic. I love that, bringing together those multidisciplinary teams, so important. And who knows what else you might end up chatting about that will also help the business at the same time. Sarah?
Similar to Christos actually, but I would say push your teams to do more. So push them to carry on. If you've had success yourself or you've made changes yourself, we often find our colleagues are saying, plastic's really important to me, or this is really important. And knowing what people want gives us levers to make change. So it's really important that you share your concerns or your ideas with us, because we are, I'm sure Bev's team are the same, we are foot to the pedal trying to do everything we can, and we can't cover everything all of the time. So the more that you can talk to us and the more that you can help push direction, the better, and people hopefully will listen.
Fantastic. I think we have actually just lost James, but are just about to round up now anyway. So I'm just going to pass. Oh, have we got James back? We have. James disappeared on me for a second there. Have you got a final top tip before we round off?
Yeah, I would say my top tip would be, if this problem isn't going away, so if you want to take action around sustainability, green issues, do it now. It's the best time to do it is now, and get on with it. And regardless of what position you hold in a business, you can drive this. It's up to you.
Fantastic. Love it. So